Something that is often considered but rarely discussed are the changes, or rather lack thereof, of a human turning into a kindred. While on some levels we all understand and accept that the transformation does things to you, we often fall into the oh-so-common pitfall of basically just playing human beings, but with a thirst for blood and with stakes much higher than during our mortal lives. Either that or we turn the other direction, playing barely contained monsters wearing the skins of mortals, drenched in blood and viscera as we abandon all that we once were and let ourselves be consumed by the call of the beast. Or those inhuman thoughts and impulses that come with becoming a follower of a path. But what does the curse actually change in a human? Once the blood of a kindred to be has been drained and they taste the vitae of their sire on their lips, what changes are wrought upon the mind and the soul of a vampire? Obviously the answers might vary, but for this video I will discuss it from my own perspective and how I look at the curse of undeath, Cain's gift, passed down from sire to child through generations. Initially, I believe not much happens. Aside from physical changes, often best left unsaid, and to the imagination, a victim's psyche does not alter much. The beast, of course, will make its entrance, often grandiosely so, but it is very much an uncontrollable shadow, a particularly violent id, rather than a part of the fledgling's ego. It will make its presence known, of course, but most kindred will reel in shock from the darkness that suddenly has found its place within them. No, for most kindred, their first couple of years are surely quite similar to when you find yourselves becoming a member of a secret society, or changing to a very particular and demanding job with on-site training. There are new rules of conduct, there are things to learn about your new condition and abilities, and there are a lot of faces to memorize. For some, like the Nosferatu, this period may prove itself exceptionally testing, unless the young vampire already lived in similar conditions as a mortal. But for some, like the Tremere, it might simply be a change in dietary preferences. After all, many of their initiates are already well versed in the vampiric world even before they become an official part of it, some even capable sorcerers or having been ghouls for long past their immortal lifetimes. So in short, most kindred are still, in a way, themselves, despite all that has happened. Unless they take measures to reinvent themselves, chances are they will retain most of their habits, speech patterns, and tastes from when they were mortal. They will take their first few faltering steps into undeath while still clinging on to their former identity. But given time, things will of course change. It is crucial to remember that deep down all vampires were once humans. They may reject this notion and speak instead of having been reborn, or being something entirely different, but try as they might, they can never really deny that they were not born vampires. Their souls, their minds, they were once human, yet they are now monsters. But are they still human? One can discuss the nature of evil in humanity to quite an extent, and we all know that humanity is capable of cruel acts of monstrosity that may make even the most hardened Sabbat fiend take notice. A vampire may act like a saint, while a human may be little more than a beast, so clearly the difference between the two is not really how humane they are in that regard. Perhaps it is merely our own perception of being human, or not, that truly differentiate us. But are we human beings capable of changing our minds to the extent that we no longer see ourselves as humans? The vampires may find it easier to do this because of their beast. It is an active force inside of them that appeals to their most base instincts, that seeks to drag a vampire down with it and make them more animal. To degenerate in a sense into a wight, a creature below even a human. Mindless and bestial, the wights have no status amongst kindreds or Cainites. They are to be pitied, and preferably destroyed as soon as possible. So can we compare these urges to what a human may experience? People under the influence of mind-altering drugs may act irrational, may make decisions based on impulses instead of thoughts, and some may develop patterns of behavior that is abhorrent to any common-sense person. In a sense, a human can succumb to something like a frenzy, but possibly not quite to the same extent. The human brain is surprisingly malleable, however, and the sense of self is not a continuous, unchanging pillar of self-understanding, but rather an ever-changing amount of thoughts and ideas that cling to the self, and that may change depending even on our mood or the time of the day. We continuously reinvent ourselves based on input from both our inner selves as well as the world surrounding us, and we alter our behavior ever so slightly based on what expectations we perceive to be upon ourselves. Belonging to a group, subculture, or even just a profession is enough to alter how you present yourself to the outside world, and in some ways, also how you perceive yourself. We are also quite capable of fooling ourselves even when there are realistically no actual expectations or even demands put upon us. To put that into perspective, who has not felt sympathy with a character from a book or a film, or has partaken in a session of role-playing where the wall between the character you play and your own self has been blurred, if only a little? Perhaps the insult from an NPC intended for your character is taken a little bit too personal, or maybe you feel a sense of joy and jubilation when you achieve success in a game where there is literally no tangible reward. So what manner of creature would evolve such an inefficient mind, one that can be tricked into feeling emotions based on false things? Well, the same creature that can quite easily convince itself that it was never human to begin with. I would argue that vampires are still in essence humans. The beast is a fact, of course, and frenzy is something that does not happen to humans mostly, but even so its effects can and will be found in them as well, although not as often, and often because of influence from some manner of substance or under extreme mental duress. But humans are quite capable of altering their own perception of reality, and we have seen time and time again how cults, sects, and organizations have molded their members into perfect soldiers for their cause, enforcing a distinct and sometimes quite inhumane ideology in them. So is it any stretch then to assume that vampires, granted their closer relationship to the beast as well as their powers, not to mention their addiction to human blood, would soon start altering their own perception of reality and in turn reshaping the way they think and act, especially since this kind of behavior is also far more tolerated amongst their peers? Certainly the Camarilla pretends to have a veneer of humanity about themselves, but even there, in the Ivory Tower, there is a deeper understanding that vampires are not humans, they are more than humans. Who hasn't heard their elders claim, "Oh, you will understand soon enough," or "Mortals come and go, yet you will remain, cut those ties before they destroy you." The Camarilla promotes this idea of otherness and alienation from humanity, enforcing the idea that you are unlike humans until you yourself believe it. Why would a vampire pay taxes? Why would a vampire involve themselves with human institutions? Why would they go to the police if they've been robbed? Why not just take matters into their own hands and claim vengeance upon the robber, despite the fact that this is morally wrong in human society? The Sabbat is of course even worse, and it drags out the worst in its recruits, crushing anyone too weak to change. Here, in the Sabbat, you are encouraged to act out your worst impulses, to treat humanity with disdain, and revel in your vampirism. Is it any wonder then that the Sabbat Cainites abandon their previous selves completely? You may be asking at this point, of course, why people would readily accept these changes. And to that, I argue that we change our opinions and perspectives every day, just like I said before, either through outside or inside influence. We may forget why we disliked something to begin with, or we may be scared into not wanting to do something again. Maybe we had a romantic tryst with someone who shared similar preferences and interests as us, and once that relationship went sour, we can no longer look at this one author or film without feeling some manner of dislike or distaste in our mouth. We are not creatures of static thought. We are not born with our minds fully formed and our ethics and morality fundamentally written into our DNA. The approval and scorn of our peers, our superiors, and society at large shapes us in a way we have difficult time imagining. Countless studies have been done on this topic, but for the sake of simplicity, I will simply argue that if you find yourself suddenly part of a smaller group acting within, yet apart from larger society, where you have to either follow the rules or get killed, you have close to no civil rights unless you find people weaker than you to bully into submission and therefore build a power base upon, and you are isolated from most of your previous life, and you likewise cannot go to the authorities because that as well may put your life at risk, will these things not very quickly force you to adapt and in turn force you to change the way you think and perceive both the world around you and yourself? Suddenly all these rights and privileges that mortal lives had are no longer yours, while you have certain obligations and duties and a nature that is so vastly different from how things used to be. The Camarilla is extremely different from modern society. Seniority and power is everything. The law is decided by the whims of the strongest, and only a very small group of individuals can be trusted with who you truly are, and even then, they may be like to stab you in the back for their own private gains if you give them a finger. Does that sound like something else we see in society? Possibly. Soon enough, only individuals capable of changing the fundamental way their brains work will be able to survive in such an environment. Moments of weakness can be exploited, trust can only be given as far as you can allow someone power over your life, and there are other people out there with the power to read your thoughts or set you ablaze with but the flick of a finger. And in these pressing situations, it would be unnatural not to change. So yes, vampires are still fundamentally humans. Humans put in a situation akin to a game of survival, yet one that only ends once you are dead, and where it is the biggest possible sacrifice to show someone else your vulnerable side. The Sabbat take this a step further, because they understand that not only do their members need to know that they are different, they must also be reprogrammed to consider themselves soldiers of an ancient war. They must abandon their past inhibitions and respect for life in order to be able to commit the acts their leaders deem necessary for the lofty goal of freedom from their elders. But can it truly be called freedom when you are no longer allowed to be yourself, but rather funneled into a pattern of behavior defined already by the Sabbat? Weakness and tolerance are anathema in the Black Hand. It is, perhaps even more so, the tyranny of the strong. Freedom only comes with power, yet with more power comes even greater fear that you will expose your weaknesses to your enemies, of whom there will be more and more the older you get. A vampire will learn to keep even minor things secret from others, because you can never know who may come to abuse this knowledge. Why share your fascination for model trains or crosswords with others when you can just instead adopt a new hobby that also serves a utilitarian purpose amongst your new vampiric peers? Fashion is no longer a career choice or even a hobby, but rather a tool by which you dominate those weaker than yourselves. Gossip is no longer a pastime, it is a weapon to be wielded to dispose of threats to your own existence. Indeed, one can conclude that it is not the beast that dehumanizes the vampires. No, we've seen plenty of proof of that. The beast, in fact, has close to nothing to do with why Kindred and Cainites are the way they are. No, I would argue quite strongly, it is their society that is at fault. They are taught that they are monsters, not by their beast, but by their well-meaning sires and peers, who replicate a pattern of mistrust and paranoia and brainwashing that has poisoned their community since Cain first created his progeny. The three grandchildren of Cain wait patiently for the time of judgment to arise. Bambi Parsons, a leader with an unbreakable will, Procyon, who has shed his weaknesses and has been reborn as a god amongst Cain's angels, and Dougal, whose thirst for blood is matched only by his strength of will and purpose. Their childhood, the Methuselah, control our every move through their timeless jihad. They are Her Satanic Majesty Dany, whose presence chills the blood, Socrates Johnson, a masterful craftsman of stories, Lauren Eason, a trustworthy ally and friend, and Alexander Kishtaria, esoteric scholar and mentor in magecraft. On the Council of the Primogen are seated Edward Reed and Ravenfang, whose wise judgment guides our nightly affairs. This week, the Council would wish to thank the Elder Gaslight88 for your continued insight into matters of our common interest. We would also wish to give our regards to the Ancile Idrin, whose service to the Council has not gone unnoticed. Thank you for your support. Naturally, all our elders, Ancile and neonates receive our gratitude from the bottoms of our heart. Without your support, this would not be possible. And thank you for watching. Now be careful out there, for Gehenna may soon be upon us.